Continuing with the second chapter of Parzival by Katherine Paterson. Few horses could travel as fast as the great sorrel, so it was by evening that Parzival found himself on the bank of a roaring river. On the other side of the river gorge was a walled city, and the only way to the city was by a bridge made of rope, strung across the ragtag torrent. Before the gates of the city, Parzival saw more than 50 knights armed and helmeted for battle. When the knights realized Parzival meant to cross to the city, they cried, "Go back! Go back!" But Parzival urged his steed forward. Their first few steps out on the woven bridge made the whole span swing wildly from side to side. As fearless as he was in battle, at the sight of this bridge, the brave sorrel shied and would not go on. At length Parzival dismounted and slowly eased himself and his terrified mount across the treacherous suspension. By the time they got to the other side of the chasm, the knights had disappeared, and there was no light to be seen. The gates of the darkened city were bolted, and at first no one answered his call or his knocking. But at last a tiny window in the wall opened, and a young girl looked out. She thrust a lantern out of the opening to see who had knocked, and saw the handsome Parzival below. "If you come as an enemy," she called down to him, "I pray you be gone, for we have suffered enough from our enemies. If you come for shelter and food, we cannot help you, for the city has been under siege for many weeks, and there is no food within these gates. It will be best if you go and leave us to die." Now Parzival remembered Gurnemanz's teaching that a knight's duty was to help those in need, so he said, "I have come for nothing but to offer my help to the king and people of this city." "Our king has died," the girl said, "and it is for the love of his daughter, our new queen, that we suffer. She will not give herself in marriage to her enemy, King Clamede, and he is determined to destroy us unless she relents." Parzival persuaded the girl to let him in and take him to the queen, so that he could offer himself in her service. As he walked through the narrow streets, Parzival's heart was moved to pity. Even in the dim light of the maiden's lantern, he could see that the people were as pale and weak as plants that have never seen sunlight. Children stared at his shining red armor with great sad eyes, and no one had the strength to greet him. The girl led Parzival as far as the castle, where the queen's guard took him into the garden. There he removed his armor and washed the rust off his body. Clean garments were brought for him to put on, for even in this sad city courtesy was not forgotten. At length Parzival was led into the throne room. The nobles and their ladies were nearly as wretched and weak as the peasants he had seen in the streets. But pale and thin as she was, there stood one whose beauty shone dazzling as the evening star. Even as Parzival stared at her, Condwiramurs, the queen, came toward him, kissed him on the cheek, and took his hand to lead him to where he was to sit down beside her. Parzival sat without speaking. He remembered that Gurnemanz had warned him not to ask questions, and he was determined that he would behave in the manner befitting a knight in the presence of this lovely queen. At last the queen spoke. "I am told that you have offered me your service. It has been a long time since a stranger has come to offer us help. Who are you, sir, and where have you come from?" "I am Parzival, the son of Gameret, my lady, and today I have come from the castle of a kind prince called Gurnemanz, to whom I owe much." "I am amazed and overjoyed to hear you say this," she said. "Amazed because the trip to my uncle's home is a 2-day journey, and you have accomplished it in one, and overjoyed to hear that you have come from my mother's brother, his daughter, Laïs, and I have shed many a sad tear. Indeed, her brother died seeking to defend me from the villain who has stolen all my lands and now besieges this city, which is all that remains of my father's kingdom. As I have just told my kinsman," she indicated 2 monks who stood nearby, "we are at the point of famine here. I cannot even offer you the entertainment that a guest of your stature is due." When she said this, the 2 monks offered to return to their homes in the country and send food so that a proper feast might be prepared for her noble guest. The queen accepted this offer gladly, but when the food and the feast arrived, Parzival insisted that it be divided so that all the people might have something to eat. The people loved Parzival for this, the queen most of all, for it broke her heart to see her people suffer. "I would rather die," she told him, "than marry Clamede, who has slaughtered my warriors and starved my people. How then can I serve you? We have had word
that Clamydes' chief officer, Kingram, will arrive tomorrow at the head of a large army. They are coming from the west, where the river cannot protect us. I fear all is lost, she said.
But on the next morning Parzival donned his shining red armor and spurned the red sorrel out of the castle toward the advancing foe. Kingram, seeing a lone knight coming, spurred his horse too, so that the two of them met. This was Parzival's first sword fight, but Gurnamans had taught him well. He returned Kingram blow for blow, until at last he had hurled the older man upon the ground and stood over him, ready for the death blow. Kingram pled for mercy, and Parzival, remembering the teachings of Gurnamans, relented. "I shall give you your life," he said, "if you will present yourself to Prince Gurnamans." Kingram was alarmed. "That he might as well kill me now," he said, "for I killed his son. What will he do to me?" "I will give you another choice, then," said Parzival. "Go to Arthur's court. There is a lady there who suffered humiliation because of me. Kneel to her, the Lady Condwiramurs, and say to her and to the king and all the court that I will not return until I have cleansed the dishonor that we share." Kingram was happy to escape with his life and hurried to the court of Arthur to fulfill this pledge. That night a wonderful thing happened. 2 ships foundered on the rocks of the river, ships whose sole cargo was food. In their desperation, Queen Condwiramurs' hungry people would have plundered the ships, but Parzival held them back and gathered gold and jewels from the castle to pay the merchant seamen for their cargo. Then he carefully parceled out all the food, so that no one would have too little or too much. Another wonderful thing happened that very night. Queen Sorry, I have such trouble saying this name, and it breaks up the story. Queen Condwiramurs Condwiramurs, who had loved Parzival for his beauty, now loved him in his wisdom and generosity. Before the sun set, she took the son of Gameret to be her husband and her king. A few days later, King Clamydes, who had heard nothing of these things, set out for Queen Condwiramurs' city, determined to subdue it once and for all, and to force the queen to be his bride. He moved slowly, for his army was a large one. Long before he had reached the city, he was met by a page from the forces that had set out under Kingram, his steward. The page told Clamydes how a great red knight had defeated Kingram and sent the steward to Arthur's court. Clamydes was furious because he thought Condwiramurs had sent for Sir Ither to be her champion. That cursed knight, he thought. Always did he have a way with women. Clamydes was more determined than ever to lay waste to the city and take the queen for his own. "Kingram sent me word," he said to himself, "that the people are starving. How can they hold out against me any longer?" Before long, a knight from Kingram's forces came riding up in great distress, telling him the same story that the page had. But Clamydes would not give up. He urged his men forward. He did not know, of course, that the city now had food aplenty, and a new heart since Parzival had become the king. The battle was fierce, and Clamydes' forces were taken by surprise. This was not the starving army of hopeless men they had expected. The first day, many of Clamydes' men were taken prisoner. "Bring them within the city gates, and take good care of them," Parzival ordered. For 3 days the prisoners received good food and tender care for their wounds. Then, stripped of their weapons, they were let go. When they returned to their units, their fellow soldiers greeted them with pity. "You must be starving," they said, "locked up in that famine-ridden city." "Oh, don't feel sorry for us," the prisoners said. "We were treated royally in there. They've got enough food in that city to last out a year of siege." When Clamydes heard this report, he realized that further siege would be useless. So he sent word to the city that if there was one inside who would dare meet him, Clamydes, in single combat, the two of them could settle matters once and for all. Of course, this was just what Parzival had hoped for. He and Clamydes met in the center of the field. They fought until both horses foundered from fatigue, and then they jumped down and continued the battle on foot. Parzival struck his foe with such a rain of blows that Clamydes cried out, "This is to be single combat! You must call off your rocks and your catapults!" Parzival laughed. "We have sent no rocks or catapults against you. I gave my word on that. There is only this machine of war." He raised his sword arm again. "Would you like to ask me to protect you from that?" Clamidi was so tired that he could fight no longer. He took one final blow to the helmet and fell to the ground, waiting for the stroke that would mean his death. Parzival raised his arm once more. This was the man who had cost his wife so much pain. "You will never live to grieve my wife again," he said. "Then why should you kill me?" the unlucky Clamidi said. "You have won everything, a kingdom, the woman I love, and all my honor." Slowly Parzival lowered his sword. "Do not kill unless you must," Gurnemanz had said. "I will let you go," he said, "if you will submit yourself to Prince Gurnemanz." "Then kill me now," Clamidi replied, "for I have done that prince a wrong he will not forgive. I have besieged the kingdom of his niece. His own son died in defense of this city. Do not send me to Gurnemanz. If I must die, kill me now with your own sword." "Go then to Arthur's court," Parzival said. "Greet the king for me, and give your service to a lady who has suffered much because of me." And so, Clamidi too was sent to serve Condwiramurs. And you may guess that Sir Kay was not happy to see two such warriors sent from Parzival to the service of the woman he had wronged. Queen Condwiramurs' city rejoiced, as only those who have known great grief can rejoice, and Parzival and Condwiramurs lived together in great happiness. They were wise and generous rulers, so the life of that place was truly good for all the people. Then the day came when Parzival said to his queen, "I must go and see how my mother is, for I have had no word from her these many months, and if by chance I meet adventure along the way, well, that is the calling of a knight, isn't it?" Because she loved him so much, she let him go, but she could not keep from weeping as she watched him ride away, his only companion, the great red sorrel. And that is the end of the second chapter.